The rain pounded the windshield as Jack Hammond raced down the empty suburban streets, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the backseat, a briefcase full of evidence sat like a ticking time bomb, proof of the Homeowners Association's HOA, corrupt schemes ready to blow the lid off their entire operation. Jack had stumbled upon their dark secrets by accident, and now they were coming for him. He glanced anxiously in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that HOA's black SUVs closing in. The adrenaline coursing through his veins made his heart pound in his ears. He couldn't let them get that briefcase. Not after what they'd done, stealing his land, threatening his family, and manipulating the system to maintain their iron grip on the neighborhood. Jack had played by their rules for too long. Now it was time to fight back. Pulling into his driveway, Jack leaped out of the car and dashed inside, locking the door behind him. His wife, Sarah, looked up in alarm. "Jack, what's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "They know, Sarah," Jack said breathlessly. "The HOA knows I have the evidence. We have to hide it, now." Sarah's eyes widened as she understood the gravity of the situation. The HOA was not to be trifled with. They had eyes and ears everywhere, and they wouldn't stop until they recovered that briefcase. Jack hurried to the study, Sarah close behind him. He opened a hidden compartment in the bookshelf, quickly stashing the briefcase inside. He closed the compartment, then turned to his wife, his expression intense. "Listen to me, Sarah. I need you to act normal, okay? Don't let them see that you're nervous. If they come, stall them as long as you can. I'm going to try and find a way to get this evidence to the authorities." Sarah nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Be careful, Jack. I love you." Jack pulled her into a tight embrace, then rushed to the back door, disappearing into the rain-drenched night. Moments later, the front doorbell rang and Sarah took a deep breath before opening it. Two men in suits stood on the porch, their faces unreadable. "Mrs. Hammond, we need to speak with your husband. It's a matter of utmost importance," one of the men said, his voice laced with authority. Sarah forced a smile. "I'm afraid Jack isn't here right now. Is there something I can help you with?" The men exchanged a brief glance. "Ma'am, we know he has something that belongs to us. We need that briefcase, and we need it now." Sarah's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. Jack isn't home, and I haven't seen any briefcase." The men's eyes narrowed, and one of them stepped forward, his hand reaching into his jacket. Sarah braced herself, but then the man's phone rang and he hesitated. "This isn't over, Mrs. Hammond," he growled before turning and walking back to the waiting black SUV parked at the curb. Sarah watched as the vehicle sped away, her knees trembling. She closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. She knew this was only the beginning. The HOA would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, and she and Jack were now caught in the middle of a dangerous game. As the rain continued to pour, Sarah made her way to the hidden compartment, her fingers trembling as she opened it. The briefcase sat there, a ticking time bomb that could either save them or seal their fate. Jack Hammond raced through the rain-soaked streets, his mind racing as fast as his car. He knew the HOA would be relentless in their pursuit of the evidence he had stashed in his home. They had already sent their goons to intimidate his wife, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they struck again. Pulling into the parking lot of a nondescript office building, Jack quickly made his way inside, his shoes squeaking on the polished floors. He hurried down a dimly lit hallway, finally reaching a heavy oak door and knocking urgently. After a moment, the door opened and a familiar face greeted him. "Jack, what's wrong?" asked his old friend, Detective Michael Ramirez. "Michael, I need your help," Jack said, his voice low and urgent. "The HOA is after me. They know I have evidence of their corruption, and they're not going to stop until they get it." Ramirez's expression turned serious. "Come in quickly." Jack stepped inside the office, his eyes darting around nervously. Ramirez closed the door and gestured for him to take a seat. "All right, Jack, tell me everything," the detective said, his brow furrowed with concern. Jack quickly explained how he had stumbled upon the HOA's illicit activities, how they had illegally seized his land, and how he had managed to gather damning evidence against them. "The HOA has eyes and ears everywhere," Jack said, his hands trembling slightly. "They sent their goons to my house, and I barely managed to hide the briefcase. I need to get this information to the authorities, but I can't trust anyone." Ramirez nodded, his mind already working through the implications. "I understand, Jack. This is a delicate situation, and we need to be very careful. The HOA has a lot of influence, and they won't hesitate to use it against us." He paused, considering his options. "All right, here's what we're going to do. I'll make some discreet inquiries and see if I can get in touch with a trusted prosecutor who can handle this case. In the meantime, you need to keep that briefcase hidden and stay out of sight. The HOA can't know where you are." Jack's shoulders visibly relaxed, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Thank you, Michael. I knew I could count on you." Ramirez placed a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. We'll get through this, Jack. Just stay safe and don't do anything reckless. I'll be in touch as soon as I have more information. Jack nodded and stood up, his determination renewed. As he made his way back to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA was closing in. They had already proven themselves to be ruthless and unyielding, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Back at his house, Sarah was pacing the living room, her nerves frayed. When Jack walked through the door, she rushed to him, embracing him tightly. Jack, what are we going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. The HOA isn't going to give up, and I'm so scared for our family. Jack held her close, his jaw set with determination. We're going to fight them, Sarah. I've got a plan, and I've got help. We're not going to let them win this time. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. I trust you, Jack, but please be careful. I can't lose you. Jack cupped her face in his hands, his gaze unwavering. I promise, Sarah, we're going to get through this, no matter what. As the rain continued to patter against the windows, Jack and Sarah shared a moment of quiet resolve, knowing that the battle against the HOA had only just begun. The next morning, Jack Hammond woke early, his mind already racing with plans and strategies. He knew the HOA would not relent in their pursuit of the evidence he had hidden, and he needed to stay one step ahead of them. Quietly slipping out of bed, careful not to wake his sleeping wife, Jack made his way to the hidden compartment in the study. He carefully retrieved the briefcase, his fingers tracing the worn leather as he contemplated his next move. He couldn't simply hand the evidence over to the authorities, not with the HOA's reach and influence. They would find a way to bury the case or discredit the witnesses. No, he needed to play a more complex game, one that would put the HOA on the defensive and force them to expose their own corruption. Sitting down at his desk, Jack began to formulate a plan, his mind racing with possibilities. He would need to be careful, meticulous, and above all, patient. The HOA had the upper hand for now, but Jack was determined to turn the tables. As the sun rose over the sleepy suburb, Jack emerged from the study, his expression resolute. Sarah was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast, her eyes filled with a mixture of worry and hope. Jack, what are you going to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm going to fight them, Sarah, Jack replied, his tone calm and measured. But I need you to trust me and do exactly as I say. Can you do that? Sarah nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Of course, Jack. I'm with you, no matter what. Jack reached out and squeezed her hand, offering her a reassuring smile. Thank you, Sarah. Now I need you to go about your day as usual. Don't act suspicious and don't let anyone see that you're nervous. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, Jack. I'll do my best. As Sarah returned to her breakfast preparations, Jack quickly made his way to the garage where he had hidden his old car. Climbing behind the wheel, he started the engine and backed out of the driveway, his mind already focused on his next move. His first stop was a nondescript storage facility on the outskirts of town. Entering the key code, he opened the gate and drove inside, parking his car in one of the darkened bays. Stepping out, he made his way to a particular unit, unlocking the door and stepping inside. The space was cramped and cluttered, but Jack knew exactly what he was looking for. Reaching into a dusty box, he pulled out a small black device, its LED lights flickering to life as he turned it on. Perfect, he murmured, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Tucking the device into his pocket, Jack left the storage unit and returned to his car, his mind already racing with the next phase of his plan. As he pulled out of the storage facility, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The HOA had made a grave mistake in underestimating him, and he was determined to use that to his advantage. Back at the house, Sarah busied herself with her usual routine, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the front door. She knew the HOA would be back, and she needed to be ready. As the hours ticked by, the tension in the air grew palpable. Sarah found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, her nerves fraying with each passing minute. And then, just as the sun began to set, the doorbell rang. Sarah took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm as she approached the front door. She knew the HOA was on the other side, and she couldn't afford to let her fear show. Putting on her best welcoming smile, she opened the door to find the same two men in suits from the previous night. Mrs. Hammond, we need to speak with you again, the taller of the two men said, his voice laced with impatience. Of course, gentlemen, Sarah replied, stepping aside to let them in. Please come in. The men stepped into the foyer, their eyes scanning the room with a practiced gaze. Sarah could feel their scrutiny, and she knew they were looking for any sign that Jack had returned home. Where's your husband, Mrs. Hammond? The shorter man asked, his tone accusatory. I'm afraid Jack is out running some errands, Sarah lied smoothly. Is there something I can help you with? The taller man's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer to Sarah. We both know you're lying, Mrs. Hammond. Where is that briefcase? Sarah swallowed hard, but she refused to back down. I'm telling you the truth. I don't know anything about a briefcase. The shorter man let out a frustrated sigh and gestured to his partner. Search the house. We need to find that evidence. As the two men began to move through the house, Sarah's heart raced. She knew they wouldn't stop until they found the briefcase, and she couldn't risk them discovering the hidden compartment. Gentlemen, please, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I really don't know anything about a briefcase. Can't we just talk about this? The taller man turned to her, his eyes cold and unforgiving. We're done talking, Mrs. Hammond. Either you tell us where the briefcase is or we'll find it ourselves. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to stall them. That's when she remembered the device Jack had left in the garage. Wait, she cried suddenly. I think I know where the briefcase is, but I'll need to go get it. The two men exchanged a glance and the shorter one nodded. All right, Mrs. Hammond, lead the way. With a heavy heart, Sarah led the men to the garage, her fingers shaking as she reached for the remote control. Pressing the button, she watched as the garage door slowly began to open, revealing the empty space inside. The taller man frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. What is this? Sarah swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I'm afraid you've fallen into my husband's trap. Just then, a series of loud bangs echoed through the garage, and the two men found themselves surrounded by a swarm of police officers, their weapons drawn. Freeze, hands in the air. One of the officers shouted, his voice booming through the garage. The two men, caught off guard, quickly complied, their faces a mask of shock and disbelief. As the officers moved in to make the arrests, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Jack's plan had worked, and the HOA's corrupt agents were finally being brought to justice. But she knew this was just the beginning. The battle against the HOA was far from over, and she could only hope that Jack's next move would be enough to bring down the entire corrupt organization. As the police cars sped away, sirens blaring, Sarah made her way back to the house, her mind racing with a million questions. Where was Jack, and what was he planning next? One thing was certain. The war against the HOA had only just begun. While the police were busy apprehending the two HOA agents at his home, Jack Hammond was on the move, his mind focused on the next phase of his plan. He knew that the arrests were only the beginning, and that the HOA would not give up so easily. Pulling into the parking lot of a nondescript office building, Jack quickly made his way inside, his steps brisk and purposeful. He navigated through a maze of cubicles, finally reaching the door at the back of the office and knocking firmly. After a moment, the door swung open, and a middle-aged man with a warm smile greeted him. Jack, my friend, come in, the man said, ushering him inside. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Dr. Patel, Jack said, his voice low and urgent. Of course, the doctor replied, guiding Jack to a comfortable chair. Now, what can I do for you? Jack quickly explained the situation with the HOA, his eyes intense with a mixture of fear and determination. The HOA has been terrorizing my family, and they're not going to stop until they get that briefcase, he said, his hands clenched tightly. I need your help, doctor. I need you to help me disappear. Dr. Patel's brow furrowed, and he leaned back in his chair, contemplating Jack's request. Disappear, you say? He murmured, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. That's a tall order, my friend. The HOA has eyes and ears everywhere, and they won't give up until they find you. Jack nodded, his expression resolute. I know, doctor. That's why I need your help. I can't risk my family's safety, and I need to find a way to bring down the HOA for good. The doctor studied Jack's face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right, Jack, I'll help you. You'll need to trust me completely. This is going to be a risky and complex operation. Jack let out a sigh of relief, his shoulders slumping slightly. Thank you, doctor. I know I'm asking a lot, but I have no one else to turn to. Dr. Patel leaned forward, his expression serious. Very well. Here's what we're going to do. As the doctor outlined his plan, Jack listened intently, his mind racing with the implications. It was a bold and daring scheme, one that would require every ounce of his courage and resourcefulness. Are you sure this will work, doctor? He asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. It's the best chance we have, Jack, the doctor replied, his voice calm and assured. But you'll need to be prepared for anything. The HOA won't give up without a fight. Jack nodded, his jaw set with determination. I'm ready, doctor. Let's do this. The two men shook hands, their grip firm and resolute. Jack knew that the stakes were high, but he was willing to risk everything to take down the HOA and protect his family. As he stepped out of the office and into the dimly lit hallway, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but he was determined to see this through to the end. Back at his home, Sarah paced the living room, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. The police had taken the two HOA agents away, but she knew that the battle was far from over. Where was Jack, and what was he planning next? She needed answers, but she knew that the less she knew, the safer she and her family would be. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah found herself growing increasingly anxious. The silence in the house was deafening, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. And then, just as the sun began to set, the doorbell rang once again. Sarah's heart raced as she approached the front door, her fingers trembling slightly. She knew that the HOA wouldn't give up so easily, and she braced herself for the confrontation that was sure to come. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to find a tall, imposing figure standing on her doorstep. It was the HOA's president, his eyes narrowed with undisguised fury. "Mrs. Hammond," he growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "Where is your husband?" Sarah swallowed hard, but refused to back down. "I'm afraid I don't know, Mr. Blackwood. He's been gone for a while now." Blackwood's nostrils flared and his jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me, woman. We both know he's responsible for what happened to my men. Now where is he?" Sarah steeled her nerves, her voice steady and unwavering. "I told you I don't know. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. You and your corrupt organization have done enough to my family." Blackwood's eyes narrowed dangerously, and he took a step forward, his massive frame looming over Sarah. "You've made a grave mistake, Mrs. Hammond. No one defies the HOA and gets away with it." Sarah refused to be cowed, her gaze meeting Blackwood's with unwavering defiance. "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Blackwood. My husband has a plan, and he's going to bring your entire corrupt empire crashing down." Blackwood let out a harsh, mirthless laugh. "Your husband is a fool, Mrs. Hammond. He's only made things worse for himself and his family. And now he's going to pay the price." Before Sarah could react, Blackwood's hand shot out, gripping her arm in a vice-like grip. "You're going to tell me where that briefcase is, or I'll make sure your family suffers the consequences." Sarah winced in pain, but refused to back down. "I'll never help you, Blackwood. Do your worst, but you'll never break me." Blackwood's face twisted with rage, and he yanked Sarah forward, his grip on her arm tightening. "Then you leave me no choice, Mrs. Hammond." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, and both Sarah and Blackwood whirled around to see a figure silhouetted against the flickering lights. "Get your hands off my wife, Blackwood," a familiar voice growled. Blackwood's eyes widened in shock, and he released his grip on Sarah, his attention now focused on the newcomer. "Jack Hammond," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I should have known you'd show your face eventually." Jack stepped forward, his expression cold and unforgiving. "This ends now, Blackwood. Your reign of terror is over." Blackwood let out a bark of laughter, his hand reaching into his jacket. "You're a fool, Hammond. You can't stop the HOA. We have eyes and ears everywhere, and we won't stop until we get what we want." Before Blackwood could draw his weapon, a deafening explosion rocked the house, sending debris and shards of glass flying in all directions. Sarah instinctively ducked, her hands covering her head as the air was filled with the acrid smell of smoke and the sound of shattering glass. When the dust finally settled, Blackwood lay unconscious on the floor, his face covered in cuts and bruises. Jack stood over him, his expression grim. "I told you, Blackwood," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This ends now." Sarah stared at her husband, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She had never seen him like this before, so calm and composed in the face of such danger. As the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, Jack turned to his wife, his expression softening. "It's time, Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to disappear." The smoke still hung thick in the air as Jack Hammond ushered Sarah out of the house, his face a mask of grim determination. They had to move quickly before the authorities arrived and the HOA could regroup. Guiding Sarah to the car, Jack glanced back at the unconscious form of Blackwood, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. He knew that the HOA president's downfall was only a temporary setback, and that the organization's reach extended far beyond this small suburban neighborhood. As they sped away, Sarah gripped the passenger seat, her knuckles white with tension. "Jack, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Where are we going?" Jack kept his eyes fixed on the road, his mind racing. "We're getting out of here, Sarah. The HOA won't stop until they find us, and we can't risk staying in one place for too long." Sarah's brow furrowed with worry. "But what about the evidence? What about the police? Aren't they going to help us?" Jack's jaw tightened and his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "The police can't be trusted, Sarah. The HOA has its claws in too deep. We're on our own now." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "But where are we going? What's your plan?" Jack's expression softened and he reached over to squeeze her hand. "I've got a plan, Sarah. I've been working with Dr. Patel to set up a safe haven for us. We'll be able to lay low and figure out our next move." Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, but she couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled in the pit of her stomach. What about the briefcase, Jack? What are we going to do with it? Jack's jaw tightened, and he let out a heavy sigh. I've made arrangements for the briefcase, Sarah, and it's in good hands, and it's going to be the key to bringing down the HOA. Sarah nodded, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. She trusted Jack, but the uncertainty of their situation weighed heavily on her. As they drove through the winding suburban streets, the sound of sirens in the distance only added to the sense of urgency. Jack kept his eyes peeled for any sign of the HOA's goons, his body tense and alert. Finally, they pulled into a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town, and Jack ushered Sarah inside. The space was dimly lit and cluttered, but Sarah could see that it had been prepared for their arrival. This is it, Sarah, Jack said, his voice low and serious. This is where we'll be staying until we can figure out our next move. Sarah looked around, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. What about the HOA? How do we know they won't find us here? Jack gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Sarah. Dr. Patel has set up some pretty impressive security measures. We'll be safe here, I promise. As they settled into their temporary refuge, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The HOA was a formidable foe, and she knew that they wouldn't give up without a fight. But even as the weight of their situation threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Jack had a plan, and she knew that he was determined to bring down the HOA once and for all. As the night wore on, the two of them huddled together, their minds racing with 1,000 possibilities. They knew that the battle ahead would be long and difficult, but they were determined to see it through, no matter the cost. And somewhere in the shadows, the briefcase sat, a ticking time bomb that would soon change the course of their lives forever. As the sun rose over the quiet warehouse, Jack Hammond and his wife Sarah sat in uneasy silence, their minds racing with the events of the past 24 hours. The confrontation with Blackwood and the HOA had left them shaken, but also more determined than ever to take down the corrupt organization that had terrorized their lives. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, nondescript device, its LED lights blinking steadily. He had entrusted the briefcase containing the damning evidence against the HOA to a trusted ally, and now was time to set his final plan in motion. Are you sure about this, Jack? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack met her gaze, his expression resolute. I have to, Sarah. This is the only way to bring the HOA down for good. Sarah nodded, her fingers intertwining with his. I trust you, Jack, but I'm so scared. What if something goes wrong? Jack squeezed her hand reassuringly. Nothing is going to go wrong, Sarah. I've thought this through and I know what I'm doing. He pressed a button on the device and a holographic projection flickered to life, revealing a detailed map of the HOA's headquarters. This is where the briefcase is being delivered, Jack said, his finger tracing a path on the map. And this is where the HOA will be waiting for it. Sarah's eyes widened as she studied the projection. Jack, that's the mayor's office. How did you? The mayor is in the HOA's pocket, Sarah, Jack interrupted, his voice low and grim. He's been helping them cover up their corruption for years. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. But how are we going to get the evidence to the authorities without the HOA intercepting it? Jack's lips curved into a small, determined smile. That's where my plan comes in. I set up a hidden broadcast signal that will transmit the contents of the briefcase to every major news outlet in the city. Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. The HOA will be exposed, and the authorities will have no choice but to act. Jack nodded. Exactly. And with the mayor's involvement exposed, he'll have no choice but to cooperate with the investigation. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but also a sense of unease. What about Blackwood and the others? What if they try to stop us? Jack's expression hardened. They'll try, Sarah. But I've taken precautions. The police are already on their way to the mayor's office, and the broadcast will go live the moment the briefcase is delivered. Sarah took a deep breath, her heart racing. I'm with you, Jack. Whatever happens, we're in this together. Jack pulled her into a tight embrace, his lips pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. That's my brave girl. Let's go end this once and for all. As they emerged from the warehouse, the morning sun cast long shadows across the deserted streets. Jack and Sarah quickly made their way to the mayor's office, their steps quick and purposeful. The massive doors of the imposing building loomed before them, and Jack paused, his hand squeezing Sarah's reassuringly. This is it, Sarah. Are you ready? Sarah met his gaze, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. I'm ready, Jack. Together, they pushed open the doors and stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous lobby. Blackwood and his men were waiting for them, their faces twisted with a mixture of triumph and rage. Well, Blackwood sneered, his eyes narrowing. Look who decided to show up. Jack stepped forward, his chin held high. It's over, Blackwood. The jig is up. Blackwood let out a harsh laugh. We'll see about that, Hammond. This time, you and your precious briefcase won't be going anywhere. As the two men faced off, the air crackled with tension. The fate of the HOA and the future of their family hung in the balance.